Welcome back for another episode of the 5G Guys. I'm Wayne Smith and joined by my co-host, Dan McFall.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back again, and thanks for listening. If you haven't already, please subscribe and follow the show and go to 5gguys.com to follow up and engage more with us. We're excited today to have Bob Fifer as our guest. Bob has over 27 years within the telecommunications, IT, and transportation industries, and he focuses on the convergence of transportation and technology. His passion is to work on rural broadband and make it accessible and affordable for everyone. Today, Bob serves as the leadership team role with Colorado Department of Transportation. He leads the Intelligent Transportation and Network Services Division. In addition to that role today, he's also been elected 3 times since 2011 to serve as the Arvada City Council member at large. So he has some good insight into that side of how telecom gets deployed. And he's also had the honor to be appointed to several committees, including the FCC Intergovernmental Advisory Committee, chair of the State of Colorado Broadband Advisory Board, and he's the past chair of the Denver Regional Council of Government. So, Bob, thanks for joining us. I think your unique perspective of having a foot planted in, all of these different areas of telecom and wireless and the public utility space with CDOT gives you a good perspective. So we're excited to have you on and get your perspective on wireless technology and transportation.
Yeah, thank you, Dan and Wayne, for having me tonight or today. Depends, I guess, where you are in the world. So I appreciate being here and sharing a little bit of what we do.
You bet. So I don't know, maybe just let's start off, give me your take on, what's the last 5 years look like in terms of how we're looking with the convergence of telecom and wireless and transportation. How's it all kind of looking? How have things changed in the last few years and how have they converged?
Well, let me give you a little backdrop before we get into there. It was one of the big reasons why I came to the Colorado Department of Transportation was I worked in the industry for years and years and years. And what attracted me to this opportunity at the Colorado Department of Transportation was the fact you did see convergence between telecommunications, IT work, and transportation all converging. And I always thought it was fascinating that, industries coming together like that when typically have been more siloed. And coming mostly from the telecommunications side of the industry, I don't know if we appreciated it as much as we could have the use cases in which people use telecommunication for communications and for solving today's problems. And so when the opportunity came up here at Colorado Department of Transportation, I'm going to nickname it CDOT, I jumped right on it. In fact, my wife helped me negotiate my pay cut to come out of private sector into public sector and okayed me to come and play in this world because it wasn't necessarily the money. It was just a fascinating part of being part of some future of where we could go. And I felt that I can add a lot of value and a lot of insights and bringing folks together on this topic around technology, communications, and even transportation all on the same topic. So when you talk about convergence, the last 5 years, especially around DOTs and transportation organizations, it's been interesting because typically we're a civil engineering organization. We build roads, we build infrastructure. Now what you're starting to see is fiber optics has now become a form of infrastructure. It's a new form of highways, information highways, in which we operate our actual physical infrastructure with. So when you talk about the convergence, we're talking about the ability to, when I reflect on this, I'm going to digress just for a minute here. When I look back and think about how communication works, when you talk about packets and you talk about envelopes and you talk about how communication starts at A location and ends at a Z location, highways work the same way. When you drive on a highway system, you get on an on-ramp, you get in with a bunch of cars, which could be packets and envelopes, and then you exit and you go to your destination. Communications operates the same way. And so it's kind of neat to see a physical world versus a virtual world technically doing the same exact thing. And so when you can have somebody envision and see how that works, it fascinated me. But when we talk about how highways and Department of Transportation needs technology and communications to operate their highways, it's not as easy as it was in the past. Now we have to have cameras. We have to detect avalanches. We've got to detect mudslides, fires, accidents, traffic slowing down, all sorts of other things that are happening on our highway system and that ecosystem that has to leverage technology to detect and react. The technology does not work on its own. Cameras do not work by themselves. You have to either hook them to fiber or you have to hook them to wireless communication to make sure that we have that situational awareness to safely operate our highway system. And that's where you start seeing the convergence coming together. And so I'll pause there. I know I said a whole bunch of things, but that's what excited me. And that's why I see that the convergence is coming together. And we're relying on communication more and more and more. It's not like back in the day with transportation where we just, get in the car and or the truck and do snow plowing or go repair a pothole or go fix some asphalt. It's now about how do we safely move people through the interstates and the highways by leveraging technology, which in return requires communications to that technology.
Hey, it's funny you talk about that analogy. Wayne and I actually, in a previous episode, one of our Cellular 101 episodes, we actually use cars and roads as our analogy to explain how wireless technology works. So it's kind of funny that you bring that up. And so if listeners haven't checked that out, check out one of our first episodes on that. And it is a great analogy. The way spectrum can add capacity and different cars have different capabilities, like your packets, very, very similar. So tell us a little bit more about, it wasn't long ago that you almost thought about the convergence of wireless telecom in particular and transportation as almost adversarial, right? It was like, we don't want people talking on their phones while they're driving, it's a distraction. But today we're really starting to talk about the two enabling each other. And you touched on that a little bit. So talk about what departments of transportation entities are doing to enable the expansion of telecom and wireless and vice versa. Are there some specific examples you can give us?
Well, I mean, we can think of all sorts of things that popped in my head, but let's go through. I want to talk about really two things. I think there's good two areas. One, we should talk about how do Department of Transportation who have right of way, how can we help expand cellular, let's say cellular services. I think that's one topic, right? You briefly said that in your statement. The other is, well, how do Department of Transportations encourage wireless connectivity on the right or in their environment, because we want to be able to have cars communicate. We want to be able to communicate to them during an emergency or an issue. So it's really kind of two topics. One is more of like, how do we give situational awareness and how do we have a two-way communication with the traveling public? The other is, how do we embrace the industry to be able to expand that service so it can be used, right? And so if I was to start with the first one, which is really how do we support wireless companies to use the right of way so that connectivity is there? It needs to happen eventually. There's still discussion around connected and autonomous vehicle technology and how it communicates. And so there is going to be a coexistence around it because there's two ways that happens. One is through radios. We can either do DSRCs, and I went blank on now the acronym, so now I'm going to screw that up, but I'll come back to it here in a minute. That's more of a radio technology. That's all it uses. It's just an antenna that's out there. It's not using cellular connectivity to communicate. CV to X or cellular to infrastructure. CV to X is what we call that. That is where you're using cellular technology to communicate to our infrastructure. That is going to be expanding over the next 5 to 10 years. And so when I talk about cellular companies using the right of way, I think we need to encourage that service to be close to the interstates, because we're not sure which way that's going to go. There's still two camps of either is it radio through a frequency that's assigned to the transportation safety frequency, or are we going to use cellular technology to communicate to those vehicles? And I'm sure we can do a podcast totally on that subject alone, and we'll make sure we have the right people to discuss that in more depth. But that is why we need to coexist with wireless companies, and I'm saying cellular companies. As far as how do we leverage it in other means, or to give you another use case that we use, in one of our highways here in the state of Colorado, we have a canyon that's being closed. We have no cellular connectivity out there. We have no wireless connectivity out there. We have no fiber optics out there. But what we're doing is we're closing the highway. It's a huge connection between two major cities. And we're closing this highway down for 4-hour intervals and only allowing so many vehicles to pass through. What we're doing is we're widening the road in the canyon. And so we do a lot of blasting and so forth. The problem is when we have people queuing up in their vehicles sitting at the closure, there's no communication. There's no way to call emergency services. text your family that you're late, you're stuck in the closure. We experienced this somewhere else in the state where what happened is when we closed the canyon, people, they were trying to get through the canyon to get to their kids to pick them up from school or after school activities. And they were stuck at the closure for 4 hours with no communication.
Wow.
So what we did at the DOT was to basically, we put up a Wi-Fi signal so that we had wireless connectivity so that folks can at least do Snapchat or texting or call over Wi-Fi, using your phone over Wi-Fi. That was so we had the ability to at least provide some sort of communications out there. And in this case, while we did that, we bought some time to engage the larger cellular companies to go ahead and put up towers in the areas. So that allowed us to still have the public safety perspective of these road closures. But in the meantime, we had a close relationship with those companies, and they're building a tower, and there's 3 of the 4 major carriers are placing arrays on that today. And what got their attention with those larger carriers was we drew that the fact that this was a transportation issue, that people could not call if there was an accident or if there was some sort of flood event or something that impeded the ability to travel through this area, or it impacted freight and delivery of services and goods. And when we started piling all that up, it drew the attention that, hey, you know what, you're right. We do not have coverage here. We do see the traffic flow here. We can give them traffic counts to show how many vehicles going there. I can't tell you how many are using one company over the other, but I at least gave enough of a case to the 3 of the 4 carriers. The 4th one is still, the jury's out on that one. The 4th one may show up as well. But right now, they're all interested and they're all engaged and they're all trying to solve it. And that's where you start seeing this interesting convergence at a different level. I'm sorry, Wayne, go ahead.
No, that's a really good point that you bring. So when you guys plan for the future, are all the roadways planned with technology in mind? I mean, does every planning session talk about the connectivity, not only for, the consumer, but for the equipment of the state to maintain the road, for all of these other factors? Yeah, go ahead.
It does. I mean, so we do put technology in there. I think what it boils back down to is, what is the means in communication? How are we going to have the technology? Like, let's just use something simple like a camera, right? We monitor the road to make sure there's not any accidents and so forth. In that particular case, we may use our own fiber on the right of way. We may buy a service from a carrier, a wireline type service, or we may put a wireless modem on that camera so that we connect with the carriers. There's technology. It boils down to the communication part of how the technology communicates back that gives us that ability. When you ask the question around, I see our role a little bit different. Like we are not here to provide or compete with the private industry around wireless technology. And so in the case with the Canyon, we bought a wireline service. We broadcasted free Wi-Fi over the queuing area of cars so that they had connectivity of some sort. We did limit it so that not everyone's sitting there watching Netflix on the side of the road because it costs us money. But we did limit it to like 5 megs down, and that was enough to do Snapchat, communicate, Facebook, do your thing, and communicate to the outside world that you're sitting there for 3 to 4 hours. But we did not want to rebroadcast any cellular service from a DOT perspective, because what we wanted to do is not set an expectation on the behalf of the cellular companies that that service was there in that area. It's kind of misleading. So we worked really closely with those carriers about that, and we would have a thoughtful conversation around, should they be deploying, or should I put a repeater out that repeats their signal but doesn't leave a impression that that signal is always going to be there. That's something you got to think about when you're in these rural areas. Yes, I solved the problem during the road work and the road closure construction phase, but as soon as the road's done and I leave, that repeater is not there. So we really wanted to make sure we were working closer with the industry around permanent solutions that would create a public safety environment for this canyon and these road closures we were having long-term, way past after we leave. So you have to have those good conversations around that, because, I didn't think about that until the carrier said, well, we don't want to make everyone think that, carrier A is perfect out here when we don't have an antenna to broadcast. So the transportation side of the world where I work, we just got to be careful. Yes, we're trying to solve a problem, but we need to be collaborative with the industry around that problem.
Hey, real quick, a quick word of thanks to today's sponsor, Vertex Innovations. For over 17 years, Vertex has been building the nation's wireless and broadband networks. Providing project management, network engineering, and construction oversight are just some of the ways Vertex helps their clients. So if you're looking for more of a partner to help you with your wireless network designs, construction, implementation, or operations, reach out to Vertex. You can find them at vertex-us.com. That's VERTEX-US.com.
So, Bob, you said something that's in the news lately is rural broadband, the word rural, and connecting those other populations that aren't connected. So what's, CDOT's role in connecting rural broadband? Does every road have a right of way, or how does that work for those folks that are out there in those far reaches that don't have great wireless or great service?
Yeah. So the good part in our state statutes here in this state, we own a big chunk of our own right of way. Not all states have that ability. And what we do is we can leverage our right of way with partnerships in exchange for services. So in other words, if a carrier wanted to come put fiber in, we could barter and swap our right of way to encourage broadband providers to go out there. And if they don't, we build our own network. We have a 1,700-mile fiber optic network. If I was to splice every fiber together, I have over 135,000 miles of fiber. I have over 8,000 fiber infrastructure. So what we can do is we can lease, as a state entity, I could lease the fiber to middle mile providers who can light the fiber and get services into these rural parts, either it being a wireless cellular type company or an internet provider or a small telco that would want to have services can leverage our fiber infrastructure to provide rural broadband service. So one of the biggest barrier of entry is actually getting, the means to get that broadband out there, which is the fiber part. Wireless or cellular companies are very good at solving some of that too. What you've been seeing now is, some of the larger carriers have some awesome bandwidth coming out. They need fiber to their towers to get to that broadband speeds of 25 megs down, 3 up. And really they feel more comfortable if fiber is at their tower, right? Now, it doesn't mean that they can't ad hoc their towers together and use microwave to do some of that solutioning. But we as CDOT, we help provide right-of-way abilities to place the towers, as well as fiber if they need fiber, and or we encourage, other internet providers to get into these rural areas. Removing the barrier of entry, like I said earlier, is just building the fiber. The fact that we can do it, and we're not a profit enterprise organization, we are here to solve a problem, which is transportation. We're going to focus on, first and foremost, putting the fiber in the ground to solve a transportation problem. But all the extra fiber I have is available to solve, rural broadband issues. So we work with counties, we work with cities, we work with small internet providers, and all sorts of folks.
Something you said as well, Bob, that kind of touched on something that's a big issue for me, or not issue, but a topic for me is, we're looking at prospectively the federal government passing a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure bill here at some point. Yep. And, that is being presented as a very compartmentalized project, right? There's a certain amount carved out for highways. There's a certain amount carved out for bridges. There's a certain amount carved out for plumbing, for, the public utilities and water and sewer. And there's a certain amount carved out for broadband, whether that be wired or wireless. What I've always wanted to see happen is better cohesion where we're doing dig once projects, right? Mm-hmm. If we're building a new road and we're putting in some new sewer and we also need to put in fiber for broadband, how can we get those projects to converge and be really one cohesive project so that, hey, if we're building a new bridge, let's make sure there's multiple 4-inch conduits going across that bridge for who knows what might need to be pulled in the future, for example. Like, is that a realistic take on what the future might be looking like? And if not, why not?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dan. I mean, I have so many opinions, and I will distinguish myself as a role as CDOT versus my personal opinion as even my elected role. Man, there's so much depth to that question. So I could tell you one of the biggest issues between industry and, let's just say, government and this particular topic is, I think it's like, what's the role of government and what's the role of the private industry? And I think that until you can come to an agreement of what that is, it's going to be adversarial, I think, between the industry and the government. What I hope to promote here at CDOT is the ability to work together to solve a common issue and find a win-win-win. And when I say 3 wins, I'm talking a win for the industry company, a win for the state agency, and a win for the public, which is also the consumer to that same company. And that's the taxpayer. There's a way to get there. And there's been many opportunities where we have done that. It's just getting the right mentality at the table to have that good, thoughtful conversation to make that a reality. And when we take down the barriers of that conversation and we just say, look, what are our desired outcomes and how do we come together and break bread and get the same outcome we all want? You know, Dan, you and I have been on some of that discussion, and we've solved it. I think with the tunnel, we did a DAS system, and we had a need. You had a need. You filled the gap on both, which was closing the idea that we had no communication in a very long tunnel. Cellular phones didn't work. Radios didn't work. Public safety radios didn't work. That was a public-private partnership where you came in and you worked with a team that was able to help us with our public safety radios, that our police and fire can use their radios in a disaster situation. Meanwhile, it also solved the ability to allow folks to use their cell phones if they need to, or their vehicles in the future, to use the communication safely through a tunnel. Or if there was an accident in there, can they call 911? Yes, we're watching it, but those are where you have to come together on a common goal and not worry about it too much. Now, here's where it gets a little sticky. And this is where I'll maybe even contradict myself a little bit. We have limited transportation dollars. So if you were to, in your example where you say, well, look, you're building a big bridge, why don't you put in the conduits and proactively do that and kind of like a dig once kind of policy? With limited transportation dollars, it could be viewed as wasteful spending by putting all those conduits into the ground for somebody that may or may not use it. And even if we did put it in there to promote a certain, rural broadband or whatever we may encourage by putting these massive conduits into the roadway to get ahead of it, which I don't disagree with. I'll come back to that personal opinion about it. The issue then becomes the state put in, millions of dollars with the conduits, and then the industry comes in and says, well, I just want to use it for free. You put them in there, taxpayer dollar did it. I just want to use it. Well, that's where the adversarially part comes in, because that's not good, true. That's not the true partnership I would be looking for. You should help either compensate, either by swapping or bartering, or solving a communication problem, or truly showing a performance outcome that says I solved a problem. Rural broadband. I provided 5,000 homes with 25 megs down and 3 megs up, or it should be now 100 meg asymmetrical in my opinion. But that's been the new talk, is the 100 meg stuff. If the state can come to you and say, we're willing to spend transportation dollars to create this new way of allowing people to pull fiber through, that would be an option. But this is what I'd riddle back. I would say, as the state built highways for carrier services to deliver their products, UPS, FedEx, DHL, any of them to deliver, they pay a license plate tax to use the roads to get to your house or to your business. Why doesn't the state just build fiber optic highway systems? Not lit, because if you light it, that's a product, but provide a means to deliver the product and allow the end user, who it could be an ISP, a wireless company, anybody, to go in and light it for a small fee and provide their services. And what this solves is, one, it's a dig one. Two, the state still owns the asset of infrastructure. If you think about what a DOT does, it's infrastructure. That's what that is. We're not trying to compete against the industry. What we're doing is we're removing a barrier of entry to solve rural broadband. And then the best form of regulation is just not more laws and government. The best form of regulation is competition.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you now created the means in which competitors can be all there, you reduce the affordability of broadband services across the board. And you may even increase the availability of it, because now everyone's competing for, well, I want to have high available internet access at a lower rate. That's a good thing to have. And right now, with the economic engines we need, broadband is probably the largest economic engine for any community to survive even during a pandemic. We're seeing a huge growth. The DOT is proof of this. We've seen larger traffic issues happening in rural parts of the state now, because if a small town has the ability to have either wireless or wireline broadband services, now everyone's working remote. The person who makes $100,000, $200,000 annual salary, or family that brings in $250,000 household income, is now an economic engine to the small diner, the mom and pop shop, the local mechanic. And now I am getting phone calls all over about accessing our fiber, because now these towns are exploding and they can't keep up with the broadband. Small towns of Trinidad, Colorado, or Fort Morgan, Colorado, are begging for the ability to get a hold of some fiber or communication, because they're exploding. These are small, these were dying on the vine communities that are now flourishing because of the ability to work remotely. So right. I know I went all over on there, but that was my.
No, it's good, right. and it actually begs like what if the federal government incentivized public-private partnership or multiple public agency partnership, for example? So you remember after 2008, the recovery funds that were put out, it was all shovel ready, got first priority, right? If you had a project that was shovel ready, it was going to get money. Well, what if the federal government said, hey, public-private, if you guys partner, we're going to take funds that were set aside for transportation, funds that were set aside for broadband, funds that were set aside for bridges. And if you can come proactively and show that you've got a partnership proposal, those are going to get higher priority, higher access to those funds. I don't know, maybe it's a dream that is not realizable, but I just feel like that's the right way to do it.
But I think it's happening, because there are some grants out there that, even with CDOT, if we get certain technology grants, if there's a partner mixed in, either public or private, so if it's like the state championing with a city or a county, or a private, we get higher scoring if we do that. What we need to do is continue to encourage the other divisions of federal funding that comes in to do the reverse of that. So private industry, if you get federal funds, you need to partner with public side as well. You need to do a P3, a public-private partnership. What we're finding is the industry will more than happy take the grant money, but they don't look to the public partners on how can you pull together. Because here's a good example that I could see happening. If somebody approached me and said, well, look, and I'm going to say I'm a city, just say I'm a city. In our laws here, the cities don't have as much flexibility as the state does on state right away. But let's just use a city example. If a company came to me and said, hey, I can get this federal funding, I can get, let's just use simple math, $10. And the city needs to connect its services or do technology on their signal system or their, traffic signals or cameras. And they're like, well, hey, why don't we partner? You can win that grant. And what we will do is we will pitch in, the 20% match to that grant, but you do all the work, you do everything you want. That's a win-win, because now the city gets something at 20%. They get their product then they don't have to do the match money. So I'm just assuming the match money is 20%. So the city gets it for $2, which might have cost them $10. The person who went for the grant got bonus points for partnering with the public side. They end up getting the grant money, so their costs are covered. Their match is done by the private side. That's just a good example of a win-win-win. And the problem is I think like some of these grants, when they come in, when they're focused on the private industry, I don't know if they encourage enough of the private or the public partnership. They only look at the private side, not the private public side. Now, when the public side gets grant money, they always tell us we need if you want to score higher, you got to find a private partner sometimes. And so, it needs to be a two-way street to be very organic and flourishing in this subject. So that's just my thought around it.
Yeah. So I have a subject. We're in Colorado, and we're talking about technology and then transportation. And so I think a lot of listeners here to the podcast who who live here or come to the state to enjoy the mountains in the winter, is there exciting or new technology solutions that you guys are looking at to help the traffic flow in the peak seasons, in the winter, going to the mountains and coming home? I mean, do you have anything to share exciting technology wise that you guys are working towards to help improve that?
Yeah, actually, we have quite a few things, but I will tell you, like, more immediately, we are looking at a new app that's going to come out in early fall that will connect all our technology to people's cell phones. Because here in Colorado, we've been known as a good source of truth, especially for the skiing public. They like to take our weather forecasts, which are pretty solid, and they like to use that to plan their ski trip. So we are bridging and putting real-time information into an app, weather, cameras, road conditions, everything in an app, as well as a text-to-voice technology so that we don't get too much distracted driving. But the idea is how to get people up into the mountains to the ski resorts and all of our fabulous mountain resorts in a efficient way. Google, we're also connecting with Google and Apple and other, like here, to share our real-time data with those apps as well, to make sure that everyone knows that if we close an interstate or a highway, that they know real time and can divert, so people are not frustrated sitting there. So that's something we're getting really close to in the next 90 to be launching. And then the other kind of technology that's a little bit further out, but I like to share it, is we're trying to get to the point where we will be able to detect avalanches. We have about 2,700 avalanches that fall within the Department of Transportation's responsibility in some form or another. And we would like to get to a point where we can detect an avalanche, we have 40 seconds to respond to that avalanche, whereas we lower speed limits on variable speed limit signs. We put up on a big message board, avalanche ahead, please slow your speeds. We want to protect the traveling public so that we don't have any bad events or any loss of life, but also to make sure that we can clear and keep traffic and travel times at a decent rate. That's technology where we have to mix LiDAR, edge computing, machine learning, a little artificial intelligence. All has to come together to be automated so it can detect, understand, react, and create an action. And that's something we are on the verge of. The technology's there. It's kind of like cooking a pie or a cake. I have the ingredients. I just haven't mixed them all together just yet. I'm waiting to pull the oil together that glues this stuff together, or the egg in the mix, to bring this all together. And really what it is, it's making sure you have communications. You have to have reliable communications, because if somebody starts relying on that avalanche situation and it doesn't work, that's a different problem, right? So you got to have reliable communications, and redundancy and resiliency along that. And you have to have the ability to become the source of truth and a reliable partner to our traveling public. So yeah, those are kind of the two big things that are probably the near term and probably the next 18 months is my hope.
Wow.
And we haven't touched on at all autonomous vehicles at all in this conversation, which will be a future episode. Hopefully, maybe we can get your autonomous vehicle expert to join us and talk about that, because that clearly could be a whole nother hour if we wanted on just that topic alone, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because in that case, instead of us putting it on a big message board, it would actually go to the car, and the vehicle would know everything. And I'll just tease it a little bit. We almost call it sign graffiti. When you're on an interstate, you got all these signs telling you exit here, so many miles here, blink, 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 this, slow down, chain ups. It becomes graffiti. The one thing I will tell you connected autonomous vehicles will do in the long run is, the idea is that technology and those static signs and all that will go away. All that sign graffiti on the side of the road eventually will go away. The idea is that it all communicates into the car. It communicates to the car. It displays it in the car. We will no longer need street signs. We shouldn't even need stoplights, to be honest with you.
Or the state patrol giving out speeding tickets.
It won't happen. Yeah,
right.
It can, unless there's some huge resistance that somebody still wants their 69 Camaro gas driven floor it down the highway. That would probably screw up the whole autonomous network. Yeah. But yeah, I'll pressure Ashley to be here. She's a great speaker. She knows her background is awesome in this world, and I won't steal her thunder, because I think, like I said earlier, you can have a whole episode just on connected autonomous vehicle technology.
Wow. Well, I mean, thanks for joining us and sharing your wisdom, Bob. It's really exciting to hear you, and you bring excitement out between where transportation and telecommunications, whether wireless and wireline, how it comes together. Mm-hmm. And, it's a big enabler in how transportation is going to be done in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Thanks to everyone for joining and listening again. We'll wrap it up for today. Please remember to subscribe or follow the show. Go to 5gguys.com to engage more with what we've got going on. We love hearing from the audience, hearing what you think we got wrong, what questions you have, what topics you'd like to see us tackle in the future. So thanks for joining again. Take care, and be well.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the 5G Guys. For more resources and to connect with Dan and Wayne, check out their website at 5gguys.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to hit that follow button and share this episode with your friends and family.